Welcome to the Bailiwick Express podcast. This is The Interview, one in a series of podcasts where we at the Bailiwick Express speak to members of our community about events, personal stories, politics, current events or charitable initiatives. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, it's Deputy Adrian Gabrield, and I'm the Vice President of the Committee for Environment and Infrastructure.
Lindsay, Sausmarez, and I am the President of the Committee for the Environment and Infrastructure. Most listeners to the podcast will be aware that, first of all, Guernsey really needs a lot of new homes, and they're also probably aware that actually where those homes are likely to come forward first is in quite a sort of small geographical area in the north of the island. And we know that a lot of the existing, current residents are concerned about the number of new homes and the traffic impact that could have. And so we wanted to be proactive and actually put in place a package of measures to mitigate and hopefully minimise any negative impacts. And actually, we think that these measures will also provide some benefits to residents of the area as well.
Okay, you've got a scarf on there with lovely bikes all over it, and you are known to be a keen cyclist. And some of the comments I've seen already are, oh, she just wants everyone out of cars and that kind of theme. But this isn't what it's about, is it?
No, not at all. I mean, I'm wearing this scarf because actually this week is Alternative Transport Week. so that's why I'm wearing this at the moment. But this is actually all about choice. And we know that choice is important because people don't feel as though they really have it at the moment. I mean, I know more than one household or family who lives in the broad vicinity of Delancey and doesn't feel as though it is safe enough to walk with small children to the park. And they don't feel as though they've got that choice. They say they'd like to. We know from every survey that we've ever done, because people tell us very, very clearly that they would like to be able to make some active choices about how they get from A to B, depending on what their journey needs. So sometimes it's going to be, a car journey. That's going to be the most sensible option for them. But actually sometimes, especially for shorter journeys, they would like to hop on a bike perhaps, or just walk, or maybe use a bus. But we know there are barriers in the way to that, and that's really what this package of measures is about. It's about giving people more choice. But it's also worth sort of explaining that there's no change option here. The area is going to be impacted by the developments that are going to be coming forward. And if we just sat back and did nothing, we know that those impacts would be really overwhelmingly negative. So we wanted to be proactive and do something in advance and alongside those developments to make sure that infrastructure is improving. It's an iterative thing. It's not a sort of silver bullet solution. It's not a magic wand. But we do want to be making sure that the area is improving in terms of its infrastructure, and that is giving people real life additional choice that they don't currently have and that they tell us they want. But the main thing is, personal choice. And also, we just don't have the space in the island, anywhere in the island, to scale up the way that we currently get around, because actually the way that we currently travel around the island is so space hungry. So we need to give people the choice that they've been asking for, and many of those choices are actually much more space efficient as well. So it's a sort of double benefit.
Okay. Some of the comments that I've seen actually have been around how the development is always in the north of the island, and can't these houses be built in other parts of the island? But we are talking about developments around the Delancey Park area or further up Route Militaire. These proposed developments have been in the offing for some time. They're not new proposals. We've been talking about the Kenilworth Vinery, Park La Lasha, the Point Rock Vinery site, and some of the other ones.
Fontaine is another example.
For years.
I mean, decades in some cases. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really important point. And whatever, I know that Adrian and I actually have got, personal opinions on whether some of them should have been given planning permission or whatever. But the fact is that actually in terms of the bigger housing allocation sites, they have been in place for a very, very long time. Planning permission has already been granted. And whether we like it or not, and we are very deeply sympathetic to people who are concerned about housing coming forward in those areas, but whether any of us as individuals like it or not, we have to accept as responsible members of the states that the development is going to be coming forward. And so really from that point, we've got a choice. Do we want to do something about it, or do we just stick our head in the sand and pretend that, you know, there's nothing happening, so we'll just let everything happen, you know, as it would naturally unfold. But we think that would lead to negative impacts, so we're really keen to do something about it.
Okay, and Lille Yard as well, which I forgot to mention, which obviously
big
at
one.
the bridge. But there's a number of developments in that area, kind of between the bridge, Route Militaire, up and down that road. So there's a number of proposals within the Better Transport Plan. Deputy Gabriel, if I bring you in here, some of the proposals seem relatively minor, things like zebra crossings, but others are quite significant. And the most significant ones do seem to be around those development sites that we mentioned, Point Rock and the Fontaine Vinery and the Kenilworth Vinery and those places.
Yeah, I mean, the development sites themselves, the planners have got a role to play, but they can only make covenants for the developers, for the measures on site. And they can do whatever on site and covenant the developer to put in all sorts of transport arrangements for all different modes. But you know, a chain is only as good as its weakest link, and sometimes that weakest link is just crossing a road. So putting something in as simple as getting people who are choosing to walk, cycle, or whatever mode of transport to get across that weak link, and that's what some of it is part of. So it might seem like quite a minor thing, just putting a zebra crossing in, but if that connects people, and it's about connections, you know, you're very close to the main centre of the bridge. People hopefully will be traversing there somehow, and we understand. And like Deputy Sausmarez said earlier, it's not about getting people out of their cars. We all understand that if you've got a sick dog to get to the vet, you've got children, you've got commitments to get to work on time, or you're in a service industry and you have to be there on a particular time with kits or whatever, you know, engineers, deliveries, you know, everyone needs a vehicle sometime at some point in their working week, life, day, month.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm a mum of four, so, you know, I very much know that there are some journeys where it is totally the most practical and sensible option is to go by car, or in my case, by van, because I've got 4 kids, and all the sort of kit that has to go along with that. But you know, for people who are keen that their children can travel independently to school, but they are concerned, as Adrian said, about the fact that, you know, the rest of the route is fine, but there's one unsafe feeling crossing. You know, it's all about safe continuous routes. So ideally you'd be able to put a pin in any 2 points in this area and be able to identify a safe continuous route. And if there's one broken bit of that continuous route, then it's going to be enough to put some people off very understandably.
And so when you came up with the plan as a whole, how did you start? Did you look at individual areas, or did you do that looking at the whole map and think, well, actually A to B, how can we do this?
Yeah.
I mean, talk me through how the process.
So it was actually the plan is underpinned by a report that was done by an organisation that specialises in exactly this, and they work with the local community in order to understand the area as a whole. And it's really, really important that we have taken an area-wide network approach to this.
Yeah.
And actually, you know, we were talking a bit earlier about developers. I think developers are really supportive of this approach, as are the planners, because for the first time, rather than just sort of basically taking a bit of a shot in the dark about, you know, what transport measures might be or infrastructure might be appropriate, they can have the confidence that actually the measures that they put in place in relation to their site is going to fit well with that bigger picture. So it is all about that network. But basically that report was done with a lot of input from the local community, with the, you know, various people who had insights to give, and then that report was given back to us, and our officers in traffic and highways went through that report and applied a more sort of technical layer of information, for example, some road widths and things like that, and also applied a bit more local knowledge for, you know, in terms of their experience of you know, what the situation was on the ground. And then that came back to the committee with some recommendations, and then the committee went through each recommendation, I mean, more than once as well, with a lot of attention to detail. I mean, I also went on a sort of recce of various aspects of the proposals and things like that to really make sure that we had a good understanding. It's fantastic having Adrian around the committee table because, of course, he you know, has got lots of relevant first-hand experience, not least as a resident of the area. So as a committee, we went through and discussed it all with officers. Then we also went and talked to the relevant designs as well and constables, and their input, along with input from the GHA and others, was actually really helpful and constructive. And so we took that input on board and adapted some of the proposals accordingly. And that's why it's been a long time in the making. I think well over a year and a half now. And, you know, I should actually give credit to the GHA as well for their role in terms of getting that initial report mobilised. But yeah, here we are. So we think it has had an awful lot of thought. We're not starting at square one. We do think we've taken absolutely everything we possibly can into consideration, but we are very keen to hear from residents who know the area, you know, best, to tell us if they think there is anything we have that we might have missed or we might not have thought of. So that's really what we're hoping to do over the next few weeks now.
Okay, so Deputy Gabriel, you're happy for us to say you do live in the area, you live near the bridge somewhere. So what do you think then of the plans? Obviously you've been working on them, so I'm expecting you to be very positive and in favour.
I can see some positive benefits, certainly. I mean, we know there's going to be an impact. And it's making that impact, it's not even mitigating that impact, and perhaps even turning it from a negative into a positive.
Okay.
You know, I see so many people who are walking, and some of them are vulnerable adults, some of them are by their age or mobility, some of them are children, some are mothers in pushchairs, and you see them battling against the traffic, the cars and vehicles that are on the road. And some of the roads are just not suitable for two-way traffic and the type of pedestrians I've just talked about. So yeah, we have to do something, and doing it as part of a network and as one, albeit an iterative, could be lengthy stage or phases certainly, is much better than just waiting for the development to happen, finding out that there's a negative impact, and then trying to sort out one solution for that one development. I mean, it just doesn't work like that. Number one, is expensive, and number two, you're doing it reactively. So we're trying to do something together, coordinated for all of the sites.
Okay, so for anyone who's read through the report, and if not, I mean, there's a video and there's an A to Z, and there's obviously loads of media reports now that the plan has been published. But it's not all going to happen in one go, is it? That's, I think, quite key. It's not that anyone's going to wake up on the 1st of June. It's going to be... And everything's coming.
It's not going to be a day one. It's going to be a one day.
Okay.
So it will happen iteratively, and it is phased.
Okay, can we say what's going to be in the first phase and when that might be happening?
So the first phase, my understanding is that there's going to be some works in the Sauvage, and there's going to be the route to Habitant is going to come online. But that's, of course, that's after we've heard from residents, people who are interested, and so there's an engagement process, and we're going to be hosting at the design rooms some drop-ins. So we've got some information which has gone out to the designs already.
Okay, if we can touch then on what's proposed for the Les Sauvages, is that correct? And it's the road that goes from near Oatlands towards the junction with Route Militaire. Yeah. I'm guessing a busy road. It's near St Sampson's High School. It's also a residential road, isn't it? So it's proposed that that road could become one-way eastbound, which is towards Route Militaire.
Yes.
And how's that going to impact the area? Why has that been proposed?
So we're basically so that we can have safe, contraflow. It's an extension of the pedestrian and cycle contraflow, which comes out of Oaklands Lane, so that you can have two-way cycles in there and one-way traffic, because realistically the road width is not engineered for two-way traffic with or without a pavement. So putting in a pavement and a contraflow and a one-way traffic flow gives enough sideways space for people to be able to walk, cycle and use the road network safely.
And is this predominantly for safe travel, active travel and choices for students getting to the high school?
Well, schools are a real priority focus for us when it comes to our transport strategy generally. They're one of our 6 priority areas. So we are very keen to make sure that we're always improving safe access to schools. And because obviously all children by their very age, by definition, are too young to drive to school. I mean, obviously some might take a moped or a scooter. Many children, really, their choice is about whether they walk or get the bus or ride a bike. So we are very focused on those safe routes to school. But it is interesting because the Bobany network, before it was put in, Adrian's done a really good job of actually bringing, reminding us all of the kind of conflict that's there at the moment. So part of the challenge that we've got when we're dealing with transport infrastructure in Guernsey is that it wasn't even designed for last century, let alone this century. It was really designed for a totally different era. And now we've got the same infrastructure, which is very constrained. It doesn't move, it doesn't expand easily. Yet we've got much wider vehicles than it would historically have been designed for. And Adrian's quite right. I mean, it's really, really difficult in some parts of our road network to get two directions of traffic past each other. Yeah. And so what the experience was in the Bobany before that one-way network was put in was actually, quite a lot of frustration, quite a lot of conflict. And even though there were many people who had their reservations about that one-way system going in, those people that have lived in the area since before its introduction through to now will generally, in my experience, always say that it's so much better actually in terms of the traffic, the motorised traffic flow. It's really helped. It's made driving in the area more convenient, because in the old days you were constantly having to sort of pull into driveways or reverse down little sections or whatever, if you came head to head with a truck coming the other way. So actually I think one of the benefits we shouldn't overlook is the fact that it does actually make driving conditions better for people as well who are choosing to travel by car or who need to travel by car.
Yeah, I mean, I remember there was opposition to the Bobany one-way network being introduced, but like you said, it's just part of the fabric of that part of the island now. No one, I think.
I've never met anyone who says I would rather have it back the way it was.
Okay.
And this is at Le Sauvage, that is an extension of that existing system, so it's designed to be integrated with it. And
then beyond from Les Sauvages, you're getting up the other side, obviously, of Route Militaire. You're getting towards Rebergerie. The other side of the binary site is Point Rock. There's also part of the Salt Pans and Rue des Monts, off the top of my head, I think that's all of them, that are named as Rouette des Habitants. What is a Rouette des Habitants? This is a new name, isn't it?
It's a new name, certainly, but so that we could try and define it as what it is to the residents, and maybe get a bit of a Guernsey twist to it as well. So in effect, it will be a prohibited street, or street for residents only. It's certainly not. I can define what it isn't, and that's a through road for anyone going from one end to the other end. So if you live in the road, you've got access there. If you're visiting anyone in the road, you've got access there. If you've got a delivery in the road, you're accessing there. If the road, for example, has a playgroup in it, you can still take your child to playgroup. You can drive there, drop them off safely because you're choosing that way. So it's not that restrictive by any stretch.
We do elsewhere in Guernsey, and I can only really think of one example of we've got a prohibited street near the hospital.
That's right, the Rue Law.
Yes, is this the same effectively as that, just by a different name?
Yeah, it's the same concept.
Same principle,
Yeah, and I think it is really important to stress that these are roads that are unsuitable for heavy vehicle flow, lots of vehicle motorised traffic. So they are sort of typically residential in nature. Yeah. They're typically not wide. They're typically the kind of road that you sort of sigh and groan if you're going one way and you meet someone coming the other way. And they're also areas where you're likely to see a lot of people, and especially children, for example, or other groups of people around a lot more. So, I think some of these areas are real community focal hubs. It's not just residential, it's also schools, preschools, other sort of education settings, other community services. So these are really important community areas, and it's really, really important that we, maintain and improve, ideally, access to them. So that is really what's behind that particular concept. It's really, I think the easiest way to describe them is no through traffic roads.
Okay. A lot of these roads, Duveau Lane as well, has been named as a Ruette des Habitants. That's slightly removed from the rest of them because it's nearer the Bobigny area, isn't it? But the ones that I'm most focusing on here are the ones around nearest Delancey Park. So Point Rock as an example, Rebergerie, Rue de Mont. How is it going to work then with access for people from various directions heading to Delancey Park, and also the Delancey campus, which has the College of Further Education, School of Popular Music, Bright Beginnings. I'm not sure what else is there at the moment, but there is quite a destination for a number of people there. Yeah. So can you travel through the Ruette des Habitants if you're heading to one of those areas, or would you have to find an alternative means of access?
If the destination is in the actual Ruette des Habitants, then you can access that street using whatever mode of transport you're using. Okay. But if it is through the other side and you would need to travel from one end through the other end, then you won't be able to do that. But the important thing to remember again here is we have looked at this as an area-wide plan. And one of the issues, we're talking about that area, it's really, really difficult to access that area by, especially if you're walking at the moment. And I was up at Point Rock this morning, and I met with someone who'd walked up that direction. He said, wow, I've never tried walking that before. It is really hard. Okay. And that's why we get into the situation where we got people who live within a few hundred metres of the park saying, I'm not prepared to walk my children there. But the problem you then get, which is the problem, the situation we're in now really, and have historically been for ages, is that the more people that feel as though it's a nightmare to try and walk even a very short distance on foot with their children, but choose to drive because that's the only way they feel is safe for them to get to the park, the more people are likely to go, I don't actually feel safe because there are so many vehicles and there's no footpath and it's just really difficult for me. So you get what's known as a negative feedback loop because more and more people choose to use a mode of transport that actually makes even fewer people comfortable walking or possibly even riding their bike. So it is about making access by as many means as possible, as good as possible. So if you're driving, you might not be able to take as direct a route as you would at the moment. You will still be able to get there, and it will also be easier to get there in other ways as well. That's the main point.
For people who live in nearby areas but that aren't a Ruette des Habitants, or for people who need to get somewhere that's not on a Ruette des Habitants but need to circumnavigate them, will we not simply see a displacement of traffic that might have otherwise used Point Rock as an example, that will just go on an alternative route, thereby just increasing the traffic for someone who lives on another road nearby?
Yeah.
Well, maybe not, because we know there is going to be a displacement, certainly. Yeah. Perhaps onto roads which are better placed to take that type of traffic. But people's travel plans change. You tend to get into your vehicle and you get to your destination, and sometimes you think, how did I get here? Because I'm on autopilot, and I've just done the route that I've done, and I've always done since day one, for going between A and B. So we know that people are going to have to change, and change is hard, certainly, and hard to accept, which we get. I mean, we're all human beings. We know what change is like, but accepting change. But some people may choose to do something differently.
Okay.
And if the choice is there, which is what the Better Travel Plan is, then hopefully they will either see that there is another choice which they can make that choice, or their travel plan will change, and the peak may not be the peak. It may be a different area. They'll be taking a different route.
Okay.
It's a really fair question, because intuitively and logically you'd assume that that's what's going to happen. And I have to say that in the world of transport policy, which I follow very, very closely, and I read all sorts of sort of geeky engineering things and all the rest of it, traffic engineers everywhere have been making this mistake for decades and are beginning to realise the error of their assumptions. Because actually, as Adrian said, first of all, the most important point is that we want to be able to accommodate motorised transport on the roads that is most able to cope with motorised transport, and we want to minimise the heavy flows of motorised transport on the roads that is least able to support that. So that's the first thing, is about suitability of roads. But also the fundamental error in the assumption is to assume that the number of people travelling by car then, when people have got many more options, is going to remain the same as it is now when people have very few options. And we know that that is very likely not to be the case. And we know this from local evidence, and we know it from evidence from everywhere else as well. And so we've got so much evidence. I can give a first-hand example, actually, of when the St Martin's School, primary school, which has been on a sort of 10-year journey in terms of the changes to their transport arrangements, when the children there decided that they wanted their playground back, rather than it being turned into a car park for the last hour or so of every school day, what they did was they set up park and stride hubs, which they call active travel hubs. And there were maybe 9 or 10 of these different hubs around the school. And they'd gone in and they'd counted the number of vehicles that typically came to the school to pick up children at the end of their day, so they could whiz off and take little Billy to football and Matilda to ballet or whatever. And so they counted the number of vehicles. So we knew how many vehicles we were expecting to accommodate, and all the adults that were sort of volunteering to help out went to one of these hubs on the first day to make sure there weren't any problems. People knew what was going on, and what was amazing was we all came back to the school for a debrief and said, well, I mean, no one could find mine because I didn't have, I had barely anyone. And what had happened was there'd been a massive reduction in the overall number of car journeys that had happened in the first place. I mean, somewhere in the bracket of 40 to 50% reduction in the number of car journeys, because so many more people had decided to travel a different way to school. And today, they've been through a number of changes, and they've introduced a school street, for example. The number of children today, it's a big school of 550 plus students, and fewer than 1 in 10 of them arrive by school just by being driven there. Yeah. So there's been a huge reduction in the overall number of people driving that particular type of journey, and a massive increase in the number of journeys taken by other means. And we've also seen this actually more typically in other parts of the island as well. So we've got loads of local data which shows that even though we've had a very steeply increasing population, we've actually seen a reduction in car use overall, and a very significant increase in the number of people walking and cycling. And we also know evidence from elsewhere. So, for example, in places in the UK, there's been a really comprehensive review of low traffic neighbourhoods, as they're called, where people were concerned that all that would happen was that car vehicles vehicles would be displaced onto the outer edges of those measures and make things worse. And actually the evidence is really, really clear that that doesn't happen. And the reason it doesn't happen is that you're not simply displacing X number of car journeys to different places geographically. You are actually giving people more choice, and people are taking that choice. And we know from every single survey that's ever been done in Guernsey that people want to be able to have that choice available to them, but they don't feel it's currently there. And I don't blame them, frankly. When I go around that area and I look at, having to duck between cars, parked cars to get my toddler out of the way of, an oncoming truck or whatever, I completely understand parents and grandparents who are not prepared to travel that way, and we want to be able to give people the choice. And it's really horses for courses. Of course, there are going to be journeys where it makes total sense to do that by car, but equally, there are going to be journeys where actually it's more convenient for people just to trot down the street on foot.
Yeah. One of the changes that we've seen, and because we've put choice in, if you think wind back to when the cycle path along the seafront wasn't there, a lot of people didn't choose to cycle because they were mixing with articulated trucks, 13.6 metre wheels right next to you, buses, fumes, etc. And so put the cycle path in, and that is just expanded and expanded and expanded. I was sitting on a bus the other day because I couldn't drive because of an injury. Couldn't cycle because I couldn't use my arm. My shoulder was in a sling. Sitting on the bus, and I counted more than 80 cyclists using the cycle path while I was on the bus from the short journey from the bridge to town. And that wouldn't have happened 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago because we've put that infrastructure in and given people the choice. And at the time, we probably were only putting it in for a small percentage of that over 80 that I saw in my short journey, and so people are taking it up because the choice is available to them, and that's what the Better Transport Plan is about. It's more freedom and more choice.
And we've got, by the sounds of it, like reams and reams of local data and evidence then. Because the cynic in me did read the plan, look through the A to Z, and immediately think these cars are going to be displaced and they're going to drive down my road. I don't want them driving down my road and all the rest of it. But it's very hard to argue actually with evidence from elsewhere, but also local evidence. Guernsey is different to the UK.
Yeah,
I'm finding it very hard to argue with the evidence. But again, I want to come back a step to the fact that this is all going to come in phases, and I guess I would imagine there's also evidence that shows that if you want to change people's habits, if you do it step by step rather than bringing in all the changes in one go, that's the way to do it. And if the rouette des habitants are introduced as part of phase 1, people will get used to those before other changes are made in other areas around the bridge, Route Militaire, Delancey and all those areas. Because as we said before, this isn't all going to be changed in one go. It's going to be over a number of years, would you say?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
The developers have got a part to play as well.
Yes.
Because there's going to be transitory routes through the developments as well. So those have to come online as well.
Okay.
And I think that's a really good point, because actually some of the measures, and certainly the ones that we are hoping to roll out sooner rather than later, are ones that are going to help the current residents and people who currently live and work in the area. But actually some of the measures are going to be even more relevant when those development sites are actually built out, so Adrian's quite right, some of these measures, so just to explain how it's going to be delivered, some of the work will be delivered directly by the states, by Traffic and Highways, and we have reprioritised our committee budget to make sure that we're focusing on the measures in this area as a priority. So that's sort of direct delivery aspect. But actually some of them, as I think we've mentioned, will be a planning requirement. The onus will be on the developers as part of their planning permission. It will be a condition that they do contribute towards the infrastructure in this way. And as I said earlier, one of the great things is that actually now they can have the confidence that the bits of the jigsaw that they're doing, they know that they're going to fit really neatly in with the bigger picture. So it's actually, it was really well perceived by developers. We talked to developers very early on, and they said, oh, this is just so much better than the way that we've historically done it. So they've been really supportive. And they're also, they know that their developments have an impact on local existing residents and the community around them. And they genuinely want to do everything they can to make sure that the development is going to be a success, and that, it's not going to be resented or anything like that. So they're really keen to make a positive contribution as well. Okay. And so the developers will bring some of these changes in a timeline that makes sense with the development of the site itself. And then there's also the Guernsey Development Agency, which is looking at that longer term vision for the East Coast, and they've got a role to play as well with particular respect to mobility hubs.
Okay, and in terms of some of the developers then, in fact, just quickly, if we touch on the state's budget, any work that E&I is responsible for is coming out of your existing budget?
Yeah,
so you're not asking the states for any more money to do any of this?
Correct. We are not needing to go cap in hand. We don't need to, go grovelling to P&R or Treasury or the states as a whole. We've got obviously a budget for this kind of work. This kind of work goes on all over the island. It's just that we have reprioritise that work to make sure that this is our top priority in that respect. So it's really just a redirection of existing budget.
Okay, and in terms of some of the other aspects of the plan, which I presume would need to be brought in with the developers. So one here, just looking through the A to Z, the Cleveley's allocated housing site, which is a development currently being worked on, I believe, on Bray Road. When I was reading the A to Z yesterday, I actually thought to myself, there isn't a zebra crossing on Bray Road. I know there is one at the very beginning of Bray Road, where it's almost a crossroads, where Iceland and the Vale Garage are. There's a zebra crossing there.
Bottom of Rudicourt, there's one. The next one is up by Oaklands.
Yeah, I'd never actually kind of really thought about that before, but that's a very long stretch of a very residential road with businesses, obviously Alliance and the rest of them down the other end, with no zebra crossing to cross. Yeah. It just seems so obvious now. Put some zebra crossings in, and that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And that seems to me to be an easy, cheap. Part of the plan?
This is exactly it. This is a really cost-effective way of making
infrastructure is cheap.
Yeah, okay. It's cost-effective. Yes. Really cost-effective. And actually, there are some really, really interesting numbers about the cost-effectiveness of this kind of enabling infrastructure on public health budgets. There's some really, that's maybe a separate conversation or maybe a separate article. Happy to give you some research that's been shared with me. But actually, when we look at this in the bigger picture as well, not only is it about personal freedoms and choice and quality of life, but actually it's about enabling, all the environmental factors that enable people to live the kinds of lifestyles that they would rather live, including, healthier lifestyles. So it is, I think, the problem that you described about the lack of zebra crossings is because it's so easy to think, when we say transport, it's so easy to think in terms of roads and cars or trucks or things, big heavy things with wheels, and actually we need to think about it from the perspective of a person, including a very small person or a very old person, so we need to be able to think about transport from the perspective where you've got people at the centre, because that's what it's all about, and giving them the options to travel anywhere within that area safely and conveniently. Because we know that those are the barriers that people experience at the moment, and the lack of zebra crossings is a really good example of a very basic barrier that doesn't need to be there, and we can fix that cost effectively, and that's what we're trying to do.
And some of the other proposals within the plan centre, on the face of it, solely around safety. I'm thinking the junction, we were mentioned earlier, Les Sauvages, and that traffic light junction, I think it's a pedestrian controlled traffic light, isn't it? At the Salt Pans and Route Militaire. So there's going to be some work there. We're not sure what yet though, are we? But there's going to be some
improvements, we've called it. Because there's going to be less traffic. Well, there's going to be no traffic going in because it'll be apart from pedestrians or those on cycles. So it'll be vehicles exiting there. So we have to make sure that the geometry of the junction is correct, so that people can exit it safely. At the same time, we've also got to make sure that the pedestrians and those on cycles are using it correctly as well. So the geometry has to be correct, which is why we've got traffic and highways engineers who are trained in that.
Okay, so that's going to be a little while off, but it's a goal to improve safety there as part of the wider plan. And actually further down the road, still St Sampson's, I think, Victoria Avenue. There's going to be some work there to improve that junction as well.
And actually, it's there's a sort of related thing, which is I use that. When I'm riding a bike with my daughter to get something at Bobany, you hop off your bike, you go across that zebra crossing, and hopping back on your bike so that you can turn left shortly is actually quite difficult as well, because it's same kind of issue. You've got cars coming along the main road, you've got cars potentially turning out from Victoria Avenue, you've got a row of parked cars, you've got a bus stop,
there's a lot going on.
There is a lot going on.
It's one of our traffic priority routes. I mean, it's the inter-harbour route. So again, it's taking articulated trucks, 44-tonne trucks from the harbour in St Peter Port to the break bulk facility in the north, coupled with all the other modes of transport as well. So it's a very busy road, very busy junction.
But again, making it safer aids to the choices that people can make.
Absolutely.
And again, it's just coming back to that phrase, isn't it, that you wanted it's not about getting people out of cars, it's about just offering more choices.
Providing the choice,
Absolutely. And it's really important, that we're so lucky to have the sea on our doorstep, and that's a built-up area. It's really important that people who live on the other side of that very busy road can get out to the beach, to that, to the sort of green space, the open green space, and the beach and the sea. And it's just about thinking about it from multiple perspectives, not just the perspective of from behind a steering wheel. That's an important perspective. It's obviously something that we take, very seriously, but it's just about broadening the number of perspectives that we're thinking this through from, to make sure that it works for the most people in every mode.
Okay, I mean, there's so many things actually in the transport plan, so I would encourage anyone to have a look at it, even if you don't live in the areas affected. I'm just scrolling through the A to Z. There's so many things we haven't touched on. The freight logistic plan I've just stopped on, and as you said, Deputy Gabriel, that's got to be such an important part of it, because at the end of the day, we all need the freight moved from one end of the island to the other, don't we?
We all need food in the supermarkets. We all need stuff at the builders' merchants. And everything else which arrives by sea, which is 99.5% of our consumables, I would imagine. Don't quote me on that figure, but
so actually,
a certainly high amount comes in by sea. Some of it is ro-ro or lo-lo, and that happens at St Peter Port. There's other bulk arrangements as well, which happen in St Sampson's. But the St Peter Port transport of goods. And that's another debate about whether the harbour's in the right place as well.
I mean, we could debate for hours what we should do with the harbours and where the freight comes in and all the rest of it. But at the end of the day, that entire section between St Sampson's and St Peter Port is crucial to the island's entire infrastructure.
Those are our largest vehicles using the roads.
And
when we're designing facilities for transport, and let's take it back to the person, we've got all sorts. You've got the smallest toddler who's vulnerable, and you've got an Arctic of 44 tonnes as well at the same time. So we have to make sure that it's safe and equitable for every user.
And infrastructure has got such a key role to play. We know that infrastructure is the most effective thing you can do to enable, people being able to choose the way they want to get around, because so many people say, I would, but I'm not comfortable, quite understandably, riding my bike, mixing with that traffic, or even just walking with my children alongside that, so we know that the infrastructure is really, really important. And actually that's a really good example of a stretch where we do have space to separate different modes.
Sideways segregation.
And it makes such a big difference.
Okay. Again, there's just so much in the plan for us to go through, changes, directly on the bridge at the commercial road, effectively pedestrianising or creating footpaths and safe walkways for when we finally get the Lille Yard development off the ground. Again, we've been talking about it for decades, so it shouldn't be news to anybody that there's going to be changes in that area.
Yeah, I mean, the important, again, I know I'm in danger of repeating myself, but if we weren't to do anything, the situation that we could be facing is you might have however many new households. How many is it, Lille's Yard?
330.
Yeah, it's over 300.
Yeah.
If we even assume that it's just one vehicle per household, which is quite low, I mean, actually, in reality, we're often looking at more than that. That's an additional 300, probably realistically, maybe even 450 odd additional vehicles. And if you're putting that into an already constrained network and already congested system, the thing to understand is that it doesn't take much additional traffic in an already busy system to bring everything to a grinding halt. So you can introduce maybe 5% more traffic in terms of the vehicle numbers, but that might give you sort of 20% more congestion or something like that. But actually the reverse is also true. So by just reducing traffic volumes a little bit, because you've given other people, people options of getting around in a different way, you can actually have a disproportionately positive effect on it as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other aspect that we've not touched on at all yet, car sharing schemes, mobility hubs. These have all been mentioned before, but what are they?
Oh, my favourite subject.
A car club one is a good aspect, and that you've just touched on there. It's sort of happening a very tiny bit in Guernsey already with the EV post office van rental scheme,
Which I believe has been very successful.
Yeah.
We'll have to check with the post office to clarify that, but on the face of it, my understanding is it's been very popular.
Not everybody needs a van all day, every day. You might need it once a month to go down to Longhu or somewhere, the waste transfer station or something like that, or household recycling centre, or you might need to take some green waste somewhere, or you've bought a bed or something. Or
You're moving.
So
you're moving something from A to B.
You're transporting something. There we go. So you go online and you get the app and you hire it for a certain period of time. So what about if that could be an estate car? Or a four-seater car,
or a two-seater car,
or even a two-seater car, because Monday to Friday you work from home, or you don't need a vehicle, but one particular day, 1 week, you're not working from home. You have a meeting in the office you have to get to, and you want to take someone else with you, be that a child or you're visiting someone on the way, and you need a car because you want to get there on time. Or for whatever reason that we use a car for, you're taking something with you, presentation, projector, I don't know.
I have to say, if I wanted to get there on time, I would not choose a car, because it's literally, our data shows us it's literally twice as quick to go by bike.
The same principle applies.
Yeah, it does.
Get on the app. That car is parked up in your development where you are, Lille's Yard, etc., Point Rock. I think one of the planning covenants for Point Rock was to have a car club in place, or car sharing. And then you book it and you use it and you pay it. And you haven't got the overheads of owning a car 365 days a year. You haven't got the overheads of insuring it,
maintaining it, servicing it.
I was wondering about the costs.
So we know, we don't have very much to go by in the Guernsey context, because the example that we've got up and running is very small scale at the moment, and it works best when it's at a bigger scale. But we do have a lot of evidence and data from other places, and the statistics from the UK, which is not a bad comparator in this respect, is really striking, so that we know that for every car club vehicle, so every shared vehicle, it actually reduces the need for privately owned vehicles by 22. So one car club vehicle in the UK can effectively replace the need for 22 privately owned vehicles. And that can make a really, really massive difference in terms of the space that we need to park cars. Because actually, one of the things about cars is they spend most of their time not moving. Like, we only think about them when they're moving, but most of the day, probably in the region of 98% of the time, they're actually just sitting in one place. And so why car sharing, or shared mobility as it's known, car clubs are so effective is because that you can use one asset, one vehicle, lots of different people can use it, and it only needs the same amount of space every time it's sort of parked. And that's why you get this massive space efficiency. And space is, of course, a really valuable commodity in a small island like Guernsey. So even if we were to only achieve a fraction of that space saving, it would be a real improvement in terms of the sort of space that we need to allocate. And as Adrian says, you know, the data from the UK and in fact lots and lots of other places, I can give you a link if you like for the notes to a website that will show you what it looks like in lots of different countries around the world.
Again, but the cynic in me is thinking, how can this work?
Well,
but there is data.
Oh my goodness me,
and
one of the main advantages. So they ask, you know, they survey users of car clubs and say, why do you use it? And actually cost and convenience are two of the main factors. So Adrian's already touched on the cost. You know, owning a car is an expensive thing. You may feel at the moment you might be a family that has to have 2 cars, and this might enable you actually to say, do you know what? We don't use that second car very often, but we do need an additional car. But if we can have access to a vehicle that we need for that type of journey when we need it, then actually we might just be able to go down to having one car for most of our, you know, day-to-day stuff, and then we've got the confidence of knowing that we've got access to other cars as and when we need to. But the other thing is convenience, because actually, as Adrian knows only too well, if you are living in a built-up area and you don't have off-street parking, it's really stressful having to play sort of Russian roulette, really, with the sort of parking spaces.
I used to live not very far from your offices, up the road here, and I used to own a vehicle and found that I was only using it at weekends if I wanted to do a big shop or go out and see see a relative or something that wasn't on a bus route or whatever, and my bike or my legs didn't want to get me there. Parking, taking the space up with the vehicle, a significant amount of space. I mean, you look out of our beautiful seascape we've got here, and
there's cars everywhere.
You see lots of shiny roofs of cars parked. You know, and we know that people have to use them for some journeys, but like we said, if you make a car club available and you can only use it for some of your journeys because you're choosing to other modes of transport or your lifestyle dictates.
But it takes away that stress as well of having to go and move your car, because I mean, you really, if you live in a built up area and you don't have off-street parking, your 2 options are: do you rent a private space, and that doesn't come cheap, so that's a significant additional expense, or do you take your chances with public parking, and that requires going out. As Adrian said, he wouldn't need to use his car for journeys every weekday, but he'd have to move it every day. So actually, it's a real inconvenience. So actually, if you've got car clubs where they've got dedicated parking spaces, so you don't have to run that gauntlet, and it's so much less convenient and less stressful. I mean, so much less inconvenient and less stressful. Then actually, that's a whole sort of bunch of things that
it's there when you want it.
You get the benefits without the disbenefits.
Electric or actual fuel.
Yes.
You know, someone's taken all that hassle away from you.
That would be
You've
nice.
just got to get in, turn the key, and pay your money, and that's it.
So car clubs, do they go hand in hand with the mobility hubs?
Yeah. So that's
what are they?
Mobility hubs. I love mobility hubs. Again, we don't have one yet in Guernsey, but they do exist in many other places. And basically, the easiest way to describe a mobility hub is one place where you got loads of options. So it will provide you with, it will act as a hub for car clubs. It will also provide some private parking. It will also provide charging infrastructure if you've got an EV, and that's another thing that people who don't have off-street parking struggle with is finding the infrastructure for charging an EV. That's usually a barrier to people actually transitioning over to an EV. It's also charging e-bikes are incredibly popular. Also secure storage for bikes, especially e-bikes, which tend to be quite high value, some of them, but also a bus, somewhere to catch the bus with information, but also a whole range of ancillary services potentially as well. So you could have a cafe or some retail space, and one of my favourite elements, which we're aware of in a transport and a mobility hub that we've been looking at, is a concierge desk. So if you live in a block of apartments and you don't have an individual sort of it's all communal space, and there isn't anywhere for you to safely leave a package. If you're expecting a delivery, if there's a concierge desk, you would be able to have it delivered to there, and it would be kept safe until you maybe pick it up on your way back from work or whatever. So there are a whole range of other services, might even be changing facilities or other storage facilities. Okay. So these are the kinds of things that you would typically see in a mobility hub. But essentially, it's just loads of really, all the options under one roof.
Okay, and again, we're going to come back to the fact that none of this is going to happen immediately. So something like a mobility hub with all those other services.
That could form part of the development agency's plans for the bridge, for example.
But the Better Transport Plan is already, in a way, feeding into those future plans and future proposals.
Absolutely. And actually the Guernsey Development Agency have been really active in terms of looking at a mobility hub. They're really keen on the idea, and I know that they've been having a lot of conversations with people. And we're very lucky, actually. There's someone on Ireland who's got experience of developing a mobility hub in the UK. So we do actually have local expertise in this as well. But yeah, the Guernsey Development Agency are obviously keen to help deliver a vision for the whole of the East Coast. They're really particularly excited about St Sampson's area, and I know that a mobility hub is featuring in their their proposals, their plans as they are developing. So there's a lot of thought going into that, but it is still somewhere in the future at the moment.
We still haven't touched on every aspect of the Better Transport Plan, but if I could ask both of you, have you got any particular aspect of the plan? One we've already covered, one that we haven't yet mentioned at all. Which would be your favourite, or the one that you're most excited about, or the one that you think will have the biggest, most positive impact?
To be honest, I don't think there's any one particular. It's the whole concept, and it's the whole concept of change and delivering more choice for me. I suppose if you put it down to one aspect, then it's choice. So everyone has got the choice. So if they want to do transport differently, they can. They can still carry on doing the same if they like to. And let's not get away from it. Some people will probably still use the same method of transport because it suits them or their lifestyle at that point in time. But with a few more neighbours, it may not suit them, so the choice is there.
So the choice for you is the most positive aspect of the plan.
Yeah, and I would say that actually, I completely agree. This is all about a package of different measures which give people a range of different options. And going back to the person who wants to carry on doing things the way they currently do, that's brilliant. And actually, if we get this right, we'll make life easier for them too, because they won't have, the same sort of levels of congestion. They won't have the same sort of areas of conflict where you can't currently quite squeeze past that truck that's coming the other way down this really narrow lane or whatever. And there'll actually hopefully be more parking available for them and things like that. So actually it works if these are... We don't have a crystal ball, but we are working on an evidence-based, set of proposals which we know. First of all, we know that the concept works really well everywhere else it's been implemented, and we have been very, very conscious to make sure there's been an awful lot of Guernseyifying of this, because we absolutely cannot just lift something that comes from somewhere else and plug it in and expect it to work in Guernsey. That would just be a recipe for disaster. So we've been very, very careful over the last couple of years, really, to make sure that we are looking at this specifically in the Guernsey context. But we know, because of all the sort of elements that are feeding in, and because we know from all the evidence both locally and elsewhere, that this is going to give us the best chance of giving people that choice that we're hoping to give them. But if that all comes together in the way that we hope it will, it should make journeys easier, whether you are on, walking, or whether you're on a bike, or whether you're catching the bus, and whether you're driving. So, you know, the interesting thing is Copenhagen is known for obviously having great bike infrastructure and all the rest of it. What's less well known about Copenhagen is that it's regularly voted the best place in Europe to drive. And that's because actually the traffic flow is so much better because they've got their infrastructure sorted out. They've taken out a lot of the conflict. They've reduced a lot of the congestion. So actually it's a really, really nice place to drive as well. But in answer to your question, I think if there was one thing, I mean, I totally agree with what Adrian said. And I think that bigger picture of what we're hoping to achieve is ultimately what I get most, I'm most optimistic and excited about. But if I was pushed for one particular aspect, I would say that shared mobility, I think, has got such huge, largely untapped potential in Guernsey, because for many people, they are very comfortable with the idea of getting around by car. They are less comfortable, for perfectly understandable reasons, by, you know, the thought of catching a bus somewhere, or, you know, maybe they've got mobility issues themselves, which means that walking isn't very easy, or riding a bike is just not an option for them. Many people are comfortable with driving around the island, and I think the exciting thing about shared mobility is it's not a big leap for people to move to that, because it's a mode of transport they're already very familiar with, very comfortable with, but it does make a really, really big difference in terms of what we can, you know, the effect that it will have on the area. So I think actually if we can get shared mobility up and running and sort of available to people where they need it, when they need it, then I think that could be a real game changer and a real change for the positive.
Okay, but as we've said, this isn't all coming in one go. It's going to be a phased approach, and it's not happening immediately, because there is always, the states are very good at offering proposals and plans up for public consultation, and this plan is now open to public consultation.
We want the public to engage with us, and I think I mentioned earlier that, you know, we're working with the Designs, St Sampson's and the Vale. We've got there's an interactive map to start with online. There's also hard copy maps, and we're hoping to have drop-in centres at the Designs as well, so people can come and chat to us, find out exactly what it means for them, and we can, you know, listen to them, understand them. We want to hear the feedback.
You've been listening to a Bailiwick Express podcast. If you like what you heard, please share, like and subscribe, so we at Bailiwick can continue to pull apart the stories that affect you, the listener. Thank you for joining us.